What's up everybody, I'm HoopsandHipHop. So it's pretty crazy to say that there are currently 802 Pokemon in existence, and a lot more went into them than you might think. Each design is handled with a lot of effort and care, and they go through a lot of evaluation before they get their final seal of approval. Some Pokemon, despite being really great, were actually in danger of not being included at all. So today we are going to be looking at 5 of them that almost didn't make the cut. So, if you guys are ready, let's check it out. Starting off the video, we've got the Gen 5 Pokemon Basculin. Now the reason why Basculin almost didn't happen is because it was quite literally an afterthought. The Pokemon was created late in the development of Black and White when Game Freak realized that there weren't that many fish Pokemon in the region, and they even gave it the 2 forms that it has to try and help make up for this. Since Basculin was created so late in development and for such a monotonous reason, it could have very easily just not happened at all, and that might not have been such a bad thing. If there's one thing that Gen 5 gets flack for, it's the large number of questionable Pokemon designs it introduced, and this certainly doesn't help its case. Making a Pokemon literally just to fill a spot in the Pokédex is kind of a lazy reason to say the least, and I hate to say it, but the generation probably would have been a bit better with one less questionable Pokemon. Nevertheless, however, it was included and it will forever be a part of the Pokemon family. The next design on this list is Mareep, and this is where we will be focusing on the design itself rather than the Pokemon. In an interview with Junichi Masuda and Ken Sugimori, they stated that there was originally going to be a Pokemon inspired by Dolly, the world's first cloned sheep. Dolly was born almost 8 months after the Japanese release of Pokemon Red and Green, and likely would have been intended for Generation 2, but ultimately the design was deemed too controversial. Now, so little is known about this Pokemon, so it's impossible to say for certain, but given the circumstances, it's likely that this rejected sheep Pokemon was reworked into Mareep, given that they're both based on sheep, and Mareep appears in the generation that the cloned sheep Pokemon was likely intended for. Personally, I'm glad that the Mareep design was what they ultimately went with, because it's a great Pokemon, and a Pokemon based on a cloned sheep seems like it might have been a little bit odd to say the least. Now this next one, you might not really think about it as being in danger of being excluded from Pokemon, but that's pretty much exactly what happened, and the Pokemon I'm referring to would be none other than Mew. Firstly, Mew wasn't created by Satoshi Tajiri, Ken Sugimori, or even Junichi Masuda. Instead, Mew was created by Shigeki Morimoto, a longtime programmer for the Pokemon games. On top of that, Morimoto created and programmed Mew into the games just 2 weeks before development was finished, and Nintendo weren't even aware at the time that it had been included. Now, as you can imagine, doing something like this, especially when you come from a tiny development company and you're working with the literal kings of gaming in Nintendo, it would take an enormous amount of guts, because Morimoto essentially went behind everyone's backs and included something in the game without approval. On top of that, he did it pretty much at the last second, so if Morimoto hadn't taken that risk, Mew likely never would have been a thing. Even if he had played it safe and requested permission from Nintendo to include Mew in the game, who's to say that Nintendo would have even said yes with it being such a late addition? Ultimately, it was the perfect storm of factors that allowed Mew to be included in the games and on top of that, be such a huge success. And with the circumstances it faced, it could have just as easily never seen the light of day. Moving on, we've got another Pokemon, or family of Pokemon from the Unova region, the Hydragen family. According to an interview with Ken Sugimori, the Hydragen family were originally going to be cybernetic-type dragons with a theme revolving around tanks. This design was scrapped and the entire idea was just going to be left at that, until they decided to revive it and completely revamp it into what we see today. Now this one is kind of interesting because it almost didn't happen twice. Once because the original design would have caused the current one to never happen, and twice because once it was rejected, it wasn't originally planned to be revamped at all. This just goes to show you that anything can happen when it comes to the creative process of Pokemon. And last but not least is yet another Unova Pokemon, Tortuga. Now this one is a little more well known, but Tortuga was likely originally conceived in Generation 2 when this design that very closely resembles Tortuga was shown off in pre-release material for Gold and Silver. However, as we all know, not only did it not debut in Gold and Silver, but it took about 10 years and 3 generations of Pokemon before it finally saw the light of day in Black and White. So, given the fact that it sat on the shelf that long, it obviously was at a reasonable risk of just never being used again. We'll never know why it was rejected from Gen 2 in the first place, or why it was picked back up in Generation 5, but one thing's for sure, Tortuga's design went through a long journey to become an actual Pokemon, and it could have very easily just never became one at all. And there we have it. Those were 5 Pokemon that almost didn't make it. Personally, I'm glad that all of these Pokemon made it because I just don't think it would be the same without them. However, what do you guys think? Are you glad that these Pokemon were included, or would you have preferred something different? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more Pokemon content every Tuesday and Saturday. Anyways, with all of that being said, I will be back with another video soon, and until then, I'll smell you guys later.